The billionaire sat in his usual corner, silence bending around him like an invisible wall, until the new waitress, with steady eyes and unshaken hands, set down his coffee without a word. The small-town cafe was always busy in the mornings, coffee grinders whirring, steam hissing from the espresso machine, the scent of cinnamon rolls curling through the air. Locals came not only for the coffee, but for the comfort of predictability. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone knew him. Arthur Kane, billionaire, widower, owner of half the businesses in the county, and the single most unpleasant customer the cafe had ever known. He had his table, always the back corner, leather chair by the window. His orders were precise, his comments cutting. Once he sent back a latte because the foam was a half-centimeter too flat. No one confronted him. People whispered about his donations to the hospital, his questionable investments, his late wife's tragic accident. But no one dared to challenge him in person, until this morning. 27, new to town, her first week at Harper's Cafe. Tall, graceful in movement, wearing a pressed black apron and a small silver cross at her neck. She'd been warned about Kane. The other waitresses had exchanged nervous glances when she was assigned his table. "Just don't take anything personally," murmured Carla, the shift manager. "He's particular." Naomi had only raised an eyebrow. Particular or rude? Carla looked away. Both. She approached his table with a pot of freshly brewed black coffee. His eyes flicked up from his newspaper, grey, sharp, assessing. "You're new," he said flatly. "Yes, sir," Naomi replied, setting his cup down. "Naomi." "You've already poured too much." Her hand paused on the pot. "Too much for who?" she asked softly. The cafe went still. Even the milk steamer seemed to hold its hiss. Kane's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite annoyance. He didn't answer, just turned a page in his paper. He wore wealth like a second skin, tailored charcoal suit, silver cufflinks, leather shoes polished enough to catch the light. Every movement was deliberate, controlled. He spoke in the clipped tone of a man who'd long since stopped caring how his words landed. Yet, as Naomi walked away, he found himself glancing up at her again. Something in her voice had been steady, not deferential. He didn't like it, but he didn't dislike it either. From the counter, Naomi noticed the way everyone's eyes kept darting to the corner table. A man with that much money shouldn't have had this much power over a small cafe. But here he was, bending the entire room's atmosphere with his presence. She thought about the jobs she'd left behind, the ones where she'd smiled through insults because she needed the paycheck. She wasn't that woman anymore. Still, she'd promised herself she wouldn't pick a fight. Not yet. Have you ever been in a room where one person's presence changed the air? Drop a comment. Was it because of respect, fear, or something else entirely? Arthur watched her refill other tables, laugh with an elderly couple, kneel to pick up a toddler's dropped toy. Something about her bothered him. She didn't shrink under his gaze, she didn't move faster when he spoke, she didn't seem to fear him. It had been years since anyone had looked him in the eye without flinching. Outside, rain began to streak the windows, blurring the street. Inside, the air grew warmer, thicker. Naomi brought the billionaire a refill, this time without asking. "You didn't measure," he said quietly. "No," she replied, meeting his eyes. "You can drink less if you want." The corner of his mouth curved, just slightly. The act ended with both of them turning away, each with an unspoken thought. For Naomi, "He's just a man. I don't care what anyone says." For Kane, she doesn't know who she's talking to. And somewhere in the quiet hum of the cafe, their collision course began. The next morning, Naomi arrived early, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned neatly at the back of her head. She liked mornings before the rush, the hum of the refrigerator, the smell of ground beans, the light still soft through the windows. By the time Kane arrived, the cafe was nearly full. He entered with the same deliberate pace, his leather shoes tapping on the hardwood. Conversation dipped. A group of college kids at the back table stopped laughing. A mother shifted her toddler onto her lap. Naomi noticed. She also noticed how Kane's gaze swept the room before settling on his corner table, his throne. She approached with his usual black coffee. "You're here earlier than yesterday," she said casually. "I have meetings," he replied, eyes already on his phone. She set the cup down, but before she could step back, he frowned. "This isn't hot enough." Naomi glanced at the cup. "It's fresh out of the brewer." "I can tell the difference," he said. His voice was low but carried. "You should learn the difference." The remark landed like a slap in the silent cafe. Naomi felt the heat rise in her cheeks. Somewhere behind her, she heard Carla suck in a breath. She could have walked away. Most people did. But Naomi had never been one to let arrogance skate by without at least one bump in the ice. She leaned in slightly. "Mr. Kane, is it possible that your coffee isn't the problem? Maybe it's the way you drink it." A couple at the next table froze mid-bite. Kane's head lifted slowly, his eyes locking on hers. There was no anger in them, only sharp curiosity, like a wolf catching an unfamiliar scent. "What did you just say?" His voice was quiet, almost too quiet. "You heard me," Naomi replied. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a woman used to holding her ground. A silence heavier than steam filled the air. Then Kane laughed. It wasn't warm, more like the sound of a door creaking open after years of disuse. "You're bold. Or maybe just tired of watching you treat people like they're beneath you," she said, still steady. His eyes narrowed, but not with rage, more like a man taking measure of an opponent. "Do you know who I am?" "I know you're a customer, and I also know I'm not here to be stepped on." From the counter, Carla looked like she might faint. A man in a baseball cap muttered, "She's either crazy or a hero." Kane sat back in his chair, studying her. "You must be new here. No one talks to me like that." "Maybe that's the problem," Naomi replied, placing the coffee firmly in front of him. "Enjoy your drink, Mr. Kane." She walked away without looking back. Kane's fingers rested on the cup, unmoving. Something inside him stirred, not anger, not offense, but something more unsettling. The faint memory of being challenged, of someone speaking to him like he was just a man and not a headline. For the rest of the morning, his eyes followed her without him realizing. Every time she laughed with a customer, a part of him felt intruded upon. If you were Naomi, would you have said something, or kept quiet to keep the peace? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to see how bold you'd be. By noon, the story had already spread. A construction worker at the counter whispered to a truck driver about the new waitress who talked back to Kane. Even the mayor's assistant, stopping in for a latte, asked, "Is it true?" Kane heard the murmurs. For years, people had feared him enough to keep his name out of their gossip while he was in the room. Now, it was in the air like the smell of cinnamon and burnt espresso. As Naomi carried plates to a booth, she passed his table again. "You're still here," she said. "Observing," he replied, taking a slow sip. "Enjoy the view?" "Not sure yet." Her eyebrow arched. "You'll figure it out." What Naomi didn't see, what no one saw, was the way his hand lingered on the side of the cup after she walked away. Like the warmth of the porcelain was the first warmth he'd felt in years that wasn't from expensive whiskey or summer sun. The next day, Naomi told herself she'd keep it professional. No pointed remarks, no smirking comebacks, just coffee, plates, receipts. She didn't need to stir more trouble, especially with Carla glancing at her like she was holding a lit match over gasoline. But trouble had a way of finding her. When Kane entered, she was in the middle of wiping down the pastry case. She didn't look up, didn't greet him, just kept cleaning until she felt the weight of his gaze across the room. She'd been in enough power games to know when someone was trying to make you look first. She didn't. He took his usual table, his newspaper folded precisely at the edges. Carla started toward him, but Kane stopped her with a raised hand. "I'll wait for the new one," he said. Naomi exhaled slowly. She knew what he was doing. When she approached with his coffee, she kept her voice even. "Black, no sugar, no cream." He nodded. "And hot. Very hot." She poured it in silence. "You're quieter today," Kane said, stirring the coffee, though there was nothing to stir. "I'm working," she replied. "Yesterday you were expressive. Yesterday you were difficult." His eyebrow lifted slightly. and today. "Still deciding," she said, and walked away before he could answer. He told himself he didn't care. She was a waitress, one of dozens he'd dealt with over the years. Yet her refusal to bow, her disinterest in flattering him, scratched at something he couldn't name. He hated feeling unsettled. She told herself she didn't care. He was just a customer, wealthy, arrogant, untouchable. But every time she caught him watching her from that corner table, it was like standing in front of a fire you didn't want to admit felt warm. The cafe regulars noticed the shift. The tension wasn't sharp now. It was tight, like the pause before a storm breaks. Conversations dipped whenever they spoke. Someone joked to Carla, "They're either going to kill each other or get married." Carla didn't laugh. Later that afternoon, a man in a crisp navy suit walked into the cafe. He approached Kane's table without ordering. Naomi overheard enough to catch, "The board isn't happy," and "Your son still won't return your calls." She didn't linger to eavesdrop, but she noticed the way Kane's jaw tightened. The man left without shaking his hand. When Naomi brought the check, Kane was staring out the rain-streaked window. "Everything all right?" she asked before she could stop herself. His eyes flicked to her. "Why do you care?" "Because you look—" She stopped, unsure how much truth she wanted to offer. "You look like you could use better coffee." He almost smiled. Almost. Do you think Kane is starting to respect Naomi, or is he just curious about her defiance? Comment your take. I'm watching for who can read him best. That night, Naomi lay in bed replaying their exchanges. She thought about the sadness she'd glimpsed in his face when the man in the suit left. It was fleeting, but real, like a crack in stone. She told herself it wasn't her business. Kane, in his penthouse, poured a glass of scotch and stared at the city lights. He thought about her voice, steady, unshaken. He thought about the way she hadn't asked for his approval, and how strangely that felt like relief. Neither of them slept easily. The storm rolled in faster than anyone expected. By mid-afternoon, sheets of rain battered the cafe windows, and thunder rattled the light fixtures. The mayor declared a flash flood warning. Streets were already filling like shallow rivers. Most customers cleared out early, coats pulled over their heads as they dashed to cars. But Kane stayed. Of course he stayed. His driver couldn't navigate through the flooded intersection outside, and the street was closed. Naomi glanced at the clock. An hour until closing, but no one was going anywhere. By 5:30, the only ones left inside were Naomi, Carla, a teenager mopping the back, and Kane, still at his corner table. The rain was relentless, the sky a deep, bruised grey. Carla sighed. "Naomi, I've got to get home to my kids before the roads get worse. Can you lock up?" "Yeah, sure," Naomi said. Carla left the teen soon after, which meant Naomi and Kane, alone. She approached his table. "Looks like you're stuck here." "Seems so," he replied, eyes still on his phone. "I can make you something warm to eat while you wait." "I don't eat in cafes." She tilted her head. "You drink in cafes." "That's different." "Not really." For a moment their eyes held. Then, to her surprise, he said, "Soup, if you have it." Naomi moved into the quiet kitchen, heating a pot of creamy tomato soup, the rich scent filling the air. She set it before him with a slice of fresh bread. He didn't speak at first, just took a slow bite. Then, "Better than I expected." "High praise, coming from you," she said, leaning against the counter. Thunder boomed overhead, shaking the glass. Kane glanced toward the door. "The rain reminds me of my wife's funeral. It rained all day." Naomi hesitated, caught off guard. "I'm sorry." She was the only one who told me when I was being impossible. She was usually right. Naomi folded her arms. "Sounds like you needed that." He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't need anyone telling me what I need." "Of course you don't," she said lightly. But her eyes stayed on him. Minutes passed in comfortable silence. She refilled his coffee without asking. He didn't complain about the temperature. Outside, the storm eased slightly, but not enough to leave. They talked in fragments, about the rain, about how small towns were different from the city, about the cafe's old brick walls. Each time their words overlapped, they lingered a little longer before pulling back. By the time his driver texted that the road was clear, it was nearly 8. Kane stood buttoning his coat. "Thank you," he said, "for the soup." "You're welcome," Naomi replied. But as he turned to go, he paused. "Most people think I'm rude because I enjoy it. They're wrong." He left before she could ask what he meant. That night, Naomi thought about his voice when he mentioned his wife, and the way his eyes softened, just for a moment, when he said it. Kane thought about the way she hadn't filled the silence with nervous chatter, how she'd let it sit, and how that had felt almost safe. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Naomi found him sitting in the cafe long after the lunch rush had passed. No newspaper, no phone, just staring out the window, untouched coffee cooling in front of him. "You're not working today," she said, approaching his table. "Not in the mood," he replied. His voice lacked its usual bite. She considered leaving it at that, but something about the stillness in him felt heavier than usual. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked carefully. "Why would I?" "Because sometimes strangers are easier to talk to." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're not a stranger anymore." Naomi sat down across from him, a bold move in itself. "Then maybe I'm the wrong person." He didn't tell her to leave. He just exhaled slowly. "Today's my son's birthday. Haven't spoken to him in 4 years." Naomi's hands stilled on the tabletop. "Why not?" "He thinks I killed his mother." The words hit her like cold water. Kane's gaze was steady, almost daring her to flinch. "I didn't," he said. "It was an accident, a car crash. She'd been drinking. I told her not to drive, but she was stubborn, like me." Naomi kept her voice soft. "Why does your son think otherwise?" "Because I was the one who handed her the keys." His jaw tightened. "I thought she was fine. I didn't know she'd had more to drink than she let on. The police called it an accident. My son called it murder." For a long moment neither spoke. Naomi studied the man in front of her, the one everyone whispered about, the one she'd called rude without knowing the history that sat like lead in his chest. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked finally. "Because you don't look at me like I'm a monster," he said. "Yet." Her throat tightened. "You made a mistake, a terrible one. But mistakes aren't the same as intentions." His eyes flicked to hers, searching, testing, maybe even hoping. Most people don't care about the difference. The bell over the door chimed, breaking the spell. Naomi stood, smoothing her apron. "If you ever want to talk about her, I'll listen." He didn't thank her, but when she brought him a fresh coffee, he didn't complain about the temperature. That night, Naomi thought about her own past, the fiancé she'd left after finding messages from another woman, the way she'd promised herself never to let someone's betrayal make her bitter. She wondered if Kane had made the same promise once and simply failed to keep it. Kane sat in his penthouse, the city glowing beyond the windows, replaying her words. Mistakes aren't the same as intentions. He couldn't remember the last time someone had given him that kind of grace. The next week, Kane surprised everyone. He arrived at the cafe not in his usual suit, but in a dark sweater and jeans. No cufflinks, no watch that screamed 6 figures, just a man blending into the hum of a rainy morning. Naomi raised an eyebrow when she saw him. "Lost your dry cleaner's number?" He almost smiled. "Thought I'd try something different." The cafe was quiet. She brought his coffee without him ordering, sliding it across the table. "You'll be pleased to know I checked the temperature," she said. "And?" "Piping hot. Don't sue me if you burn your tongue." His low chuckle startled her, not sharp or sarcastic, but warm, like it belonged to a man he hadn't been in years. A delivery mix-up left Naomi waiting an extra half-hour for new supplies. Kane stayed, watching her restock pastries and wipe counters. "You work hard," he said suddenly. "So do you," she replied. "I work expensively. It's not the same." Naomi leaned against the counter, curious. "What did you do before all this?" "All this?" "The suits, the board meetings, the way people flinch when you look at them." He thought about it. I built companies. I built walls around myself. Both worked too well. Later, when the rain eased, Naomi sat at his table during her break. They talked about music, her love of old jazz, his fondness for classical piano. She told him about her grandmother's cornbread recipe. He told her about the summer he spent fixing a boat with his father. Each story was a thread, and without meaning to, they began weaving something between them. When she laughed at one of his dry jokes, Kane found himself watching her mouth, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. It wasn't the polite smile most people gave him. It was unguarded, real. Naomi noticed the way his shoulders relaxed when they talked, the way the sharpness in his voice softened into something almost gentle. Before he left, she handed him a paper cup with a muffin inside. On the house. "I don't take handouts," he said automatically. "It's not a handout. It's a dare. Try it without criticizing." He smirked. "Dangerous game. You'll live." That night, Kane ate the muffin while standing at his kitchen counter. He didn't realize until halfway through that he was smiling. Naomi, meanwhile, sat in her apartment thinking about his laugh, not the brittle one he used for boardrooms, but the quiet, genuine one she'd coaxed out of hiding. Friday afternoon. The cafe was buzzing with weekend energy, chatter, clinking cups, the hiss of milk steam. Naomi moved between tables with practiced ease. Kane sat in his corner, his eyes following her like they had every day that week. But today he wasn't alone. A tall man in a charcoal suit approached Kane's table, the same man Naomi had seen weeks ago, the one who'd left him tense and silent. She caught snippets of the conversation as she passed with a tray. "The press is circling again. Your son gave an interview." "The waitress." Her step faltered. "The waitress?" When she returned to the counter, she couldn't help glancing back. Kane and the man were speaking in low voices. Then, as if sensing her gaze, Kane looked straight at her. For the first time since they'd met, there was no softness in his expression, only the hard, closed-off mask she'd seen on her first day. Moments later, the suited man left. Kane stayed, but Naomi didn't go near him. She busied herself with other tables until his voice cut through the room. "Naomi." She approached slowly. "What?" "You've been talking about me to customers," he said flatly. Her brow furrowed. "Excuse me?" "My son's assistant heard stories from this cafe, about me. From you." Naomi's stomach tightened. "I haven't said anything except that you're particular." "That's enough," he said. "Enough for gossip. Enough for damage." She felt heat rise in her chest. "You think I'm here trying to ruin your life? I barely know you." "That hasn't stopped anyone else." Her voice sharpened. "You came in here every day making people walk on eggshells. I treated you like a human being, not a headline, and now you accuse me of being like everyone else," he finished. His tone was cold, final. Something inside her cracked. "You know what, Kane? Maybe I was wrong about you. Maybe you do enjoy being the villain." She walked away before he could answer, her hands shaking as she set down a tray. The cafe's usual hum seemed louder, every clink and murmur pressing on her ears. Kane stayed for another 15 minutes, untouched coffee cooling in front of him. When he finally left, he didn't look back. That night, Naomi sat in her apartment replaying the exchange. She thought of the soup, the muffin, the conversations about music and boats. She thought of the moment he'd told her about his wife, and wondered if she'd imagined the man she thought she saw. Kane stood in his penthouse, scotch in hand, telling himself he'd been right. People always turned. But the truth scraped at him. He didn't know if she had, and it mattered more than he wanted to admit. Naomi didn't see Kane for 3 days. No suit in the corner, no eyes following her across the cafe. The regulars noticed. Carla didn't say anything, but Naomi caught her glancing at the empty table more than once. By the 4th day, Naomi was telling herself she didn't care. People left. People disappointed you. It was easier to move on. And yet, she found herself checking the door whenever the bell chimed. In his penthouse, Kane stood by the window overlooking the city. He'd buried himself in meetings, deals, endless paperwork, But no matter how many contracts he signed, he couldn't silence the echo of her words. Maybe you do enjoy being the villain. The worst part. She hadn't been entirely wrong. That evening, Kane sat at his desk, staring at his phone. It would take one call to his driver to end this silence. One call to be back at that cafe. But pride was a stubborn thing, and his had been built into armor. He poured a scotch instead. Naomi closed the cafe alone that night. The quiet felt heavy, the hum of the refrigerator too loud. She sat at a corner table, not his corner, but close enough to see the view he always claimed. She thought about the moment he'd told her about his wife, about how he'd eaten the muffin, about his laugh. She thought about how quick he'd been to believe she'd betray him. Was it really betrayal he'd seen, or just the ghost of someone else's? By the 5th day, she'd made her choice. If he came back, she'd listen, really listen, but she wouldn't beg him to. That same night, Kane made his choice too. He was tired of being right about people, tired of being alone, tired of coffee that didn't come with her voice. On the 6th morning, the bell over the cafe door chimed. Naomi looked up from behind the counter. Kane stood there, hands in his coat pockets, eyes unreadable. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he crossed the room to her. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I was wrong." Naomi held his gaze. "About what?" "About you." She didn't smile, not yet. "And if I forgive you? Then maybe we can both stop pretending we don't care." The cafe was quiet for the hour after Kane's arrival. The usual chatter softened, as though everyone sensed something different in the air. Naomi moved between tables, topping off coffees, delivering pastries, pretending not to feel his eyes following her again. Only now there was no sharpness in them. When the rush slowed, she approached his table. "You still take it black, no sugar?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "I trust you to know what I need." She brought his coffee, setting it down without measuring, the same way she had on her very first day. "This one's hot," she said. "I'll drink it slower," he replied. For a moment they just looked at each other, and it felt like the rest of the cafe faded away. Kane cleared his throat. "My son, I called him yesterday." Naomi's brow lifted. "He didn't hang up this time. I told him I'm sorry. For everything." "And?" "I don't know yet, but it's a start." Naomi's lips curved gently. "Starts are good." They spoke quietly for the next half hour, about small things and about nothing at all, the kind of conversation that felt like breathing. Before he left, Kane stood beside her at the counter. "Naomi," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You were right. I don't enjoy being the villain. I just forgot how to be anything else." Her eyes softened. "Then maybe you just needed a better role." He chuckled, a real one, warm and unguarded. "I'd like to see you outside of this place," he said. "Dinner, or anywhere that doesn't smell like espresso." Naomi tilted her head. "I'll think about it." His smirk was back, but lighter this time. "I'll take that as a maybe." The next morning, Kane returned. Same table, same coffee, same steady gaze. But this time, when Naomi set his cup down, he said, "Thank you," loud enough for the whole cafe to hear. And for the first time in years, no one in the room looked at him with fear. Do you believe people like Kane can truly change if given the right reason or person to try? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious who's a believer in redemption.